Hi everybody, this is the YouTube video on modulation that you'll be using this week to get you excited about all these exercises and how things work. So I thought I'd talk you through some of it first, and then you can work with Abby or on your own a little bit to figure out how to put this all into practice. So just review from yesterday's class where we talked about modulation, which is a change in tonal center, and it includes two things that you have to remember. One is consistent accidentals. So if I'm in the key of C and I'm moving to the key of G, I'm going to see F sharps everywhere. But also, you really want a cadence in that new key. A cadence is what solidifies that that new key has been established. So I want to talk about that a little bit today, as well as finding some of these pivot chords. So first I want to start with, in your book, 27.3. So if you look at 27.3 in your book, we kind of started this the other day. It's the Haydn String Quartet, 27.3. You'll see it happily starts in the key of D. So you got this nice movement down like that. Everything's fine. Everything's going along. If you look at the progression in your book, you have 1, 2, 5, 1. There's your predominant, dominant, tonic. And then if you look over on the next page, you get to measure 5. And we talked about this a little bit. You're going to see consistent G sharps. And those G sharps last until that final cadence that goes. So that modulation to A, the G sharps that are consistent, and then you have a cadence to the key of A. That shows you that there's some sort of modulation happening. And we talked a little bit about that on Friday. So I want to switch on down to 27.4 on page 259. This talks about something called a pivot chord. And a pivot chord is a chord that can actually function in both keys. So before we see what's happening in your book, I thought we kind of do a little bit about what happened yesterday. So I just wrote out two keys here. So this is E major. So see E major there. And here's B major. So these are closely related. This is a, let's pretend this is tonic, and we're going to move to the dominant. So by looking at these two right here, you're going to see that you got some chords in common. I'm going to circle them. So I'll circle all of them. So E major is common. All right. Let's see. G sharp minor, that's common in both. There's B, that's common. C sharp minor. See what I did? All I did is I circled the actual chords that are common to both keys. Okay, so hopefully that makes sense. We went through that on Friday. So I'm going to make up a quick progression. I'm going to start in the key of E major. I'm going to try to go to B. So I'm going to start with a pretty standard 1 to a 4 to a 2 to a 5 to a 6. Okay. So if I'm in the key of E, that's what I have so far. So you got our tonic, there's our subdominant prolonged a little bit. Here's my 5, my dominant. Instead of going to 1, I'm going to go to a 6. Because if I look up here, my 6 chord, that's a common chord. That's a pivot chord. That's going to be the moment that I'm going to switch. So let me show you how this works. Look what I just did. Here we got the 1, the 5, the 2, sorry, the 1, the 4, the 2, the 5, and the 6. At this point right here, this 6 chord, 6 in the key of E is C sharp minor. C sharp minor right here is going to become C sharp minor in the key of B. C sharp's functioning as the 2. So then I'm going to cadence this one on out. And I'm just going to use a CAD 6-4 because that's a pretty strong cadence. But from here on out, from this point on, I'm going to have to include A sharps because I'm in the key of B by that point. So let's listen, see what that sounds like. I wish I could hold it up and play the keys. Let me let you copy that down some way for a second. So copy down those chords so you can see how this is working. And I'll actually call it out to you while I'm playing it. Okay, so you got it copied down. So let's listen what this sounds like. I'm in the key of E. Here we go. So there's the 1 chord, to the 4, jumping up to the 2, to the 5, to the 6, which is going to become the 2 in the key of B. Now that probably didn't sound very dramatic at all because it sounded really smooth. Pivot chords are, there's that C sharp minor, which jumping up to the Cat 6-4, I mean, we've done that before, makes perfect sense going from that predominant chord to that dominant function chord. Now go to 27.4 in your book at the bottom of page 259. Same principle here. I'm in the key of C. 6 or 2. So again, I won't talk over it this time. That's 6 and that 2. When I hit that F sharp, now you could call that a secondary dominant. We don't have a lot of context there. But when I see that F sharp and I see that cadence on G, at that point, I go, okay, well, F sharp's my signal that I'm in my new key. I'm going to go 1 chord before and see if I can explain that chord in both keys. So I got A minor chord, that's a 6 in C, and a 6 in G. Listen to the difference. This one doesn't have a pivot chord. Second one on 27.4. I went 1 chord before that D major chord, I'm on an F chord, and I can't explain an F chord in the key of G. So that one actually doesn't have a pivot. All right, turn the page. Let's look at 27.6. I'm going to play it through this from the ebook, but you might want to do that on your own. So here we go. Okay, let's listen again. Follow along on page 260. Okay, when I look at that example and I'm looking at the very opening, it's very obvious to my ears and my eyes that I'm in the key of G. So everything's great. We have typical progression there. But then when I get to the second system, all of a sudden I see lots of C sharps. So the first measure with C sharp is that first measure on the second system. I'm going to go 1 chord back and I'm going to just write out the notes. Now I know it's in your book and you can figure it out, but so G, B, D. So that's how G, B, D, that chord right there is a 1 in the key of G, but it's also a 4 in the key of D at the same time. And I tend to write mine with this little bracket that clearly shows that anything over here is in 1 key, anything at this point is over next. So that's what that box means. So 1 and 4. Now we have to get back to D at some point. So if you look to the third system, you'll see that there's that C natural. So go 1 chord back, and that's where you get the 5 and the 1. That's called the pivot chord. That's your moment of pivot to get back. After that point, all the C's are natural. You'll see even in the third measure of the third system, it's still a C natural. All right, so going on to 261, I want you to listen to these two pieces because one is definitely a modulation and one is a tonicization. The difference being is one is a temporary change in key and one is a permanent change of key, especially with the cadence. So let's listen to 27.8 on 261. Follow along with your music. 27.8. Now, some of you are really familiar with this. If you were in the Magic Flute last year, you heard this over and over and over. So you'll look at your example. They put the pivot chord right there on the C. Now, you're actually in the key of F. Everything's going along fine in F. You see B naturals coming. Now, you do have some options here on where to put your pivot chord, but there is no doubt in your ear that something has happened. You have a cadence on C at the very end. And like I said, they put the pivot chord on the 5 and the 1. You can see it in your book. You go to a minor chord there. That would be a 3 in the key of F. That sometimes is a little tricky, as we know. Then you go to a D minor chord, and that could be another pivot chord, being a 6 and a 2. But once that B natural comes in and measure 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, measure 6, there's no doubt you're in the key of C. As opposed to this one, go to 27.9. So turn the page. 27.9. Listen to this. Trust your ears. So if you see in your book, you got a lot of secondary dominants there. And the way it looks in that box is you've got tons of 5s. And you might be, willing or want to say, well, that seems like a bunch of C. Everything's C right there. But there's no cadence. So it's a series of secondary chords, but it doesn't stay in the key of C for long enough for our ears to establish that. And it doesn't have the cadence, as opposed to the Mozart example, to where you have a really strong cadential 6, 4, 5 action happening right there. So that's the difference between tonicization and modulation. And this is one of the things that we as theorists love to talk about. There are instances to where you might be able to argue the case for modulation while somebody else will hear tonicization. And of course, as we always say, that'll affect how we play things. All right, what I want you to try to do for homework is page 289 in the workbook. This is letter C, number 2. I want to show you how to get started. This is part writing, so we'll be on page 289. We're in the key of E flat. Not the world's greatest dry erase marker. And all that they gave you with the Roman numerals. So you guys are pros at part writing, but I want to show you how you figure out this chord. Okay. Let's scroll this down. All right. Okay, so here's the example. This is number 2, letter A, where they gave you just the first part here. Okay, here's a 1 chord in the key of E flat. So you got a 1 chord in E flat. So think about it. What is a 1 chord in E flat? All right, well, that's an E flat major chord. What is E flat in the key of B flat? B flat, C, D, 4. So you have to fill in that blank. But after you part write this out, and you're, like I said, careful here because these are a second apart. But as you part write this particular one out, starting right here is where you need to change your accidentals for that key. So if I was in E flat and going to B flat, all of a sudden I'm going to have some A naturals in there. Does that make sense? So you're going to have A naturals from here on because you've changed keys. The other thing I want you to do for homework is on page 297. And I'm going to let you do that part on your own on page 297. This is just a Roman numeral analysis. What I want you to pay the closest attention to here is that once you start to see accidentals like letter A on page 297, you start to see a bunch of C sharps. So once you see those C sharps, go 1 chord ahead of that C sharp. And then you'll be able to figure out how that works both in the key of G and both in the key of D. So you're going to want to do both page 289, 2, A, B, and C for homework, and page 297, A and B. So hopefully some of you are watching this in the classroom now, so you can go ahead and get started on your homework. And I'll see y'all on Tuesday.